Lawrence Jackson stood in the gleaming boardroom, tearing the $900 million contract while billionaire Richard Montgomery's face turned crimson with rage. The powerful white executives froze in shock as Lawrence made his quiet declaration, "Nobody disrespects my mother." Everything had led to this moment. Before we dive into this incredible story of dignity over dollars, tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you believe family comes before fortune. Now let's rewind to see how this amazing confrontation came to be. Lawrence Jackson had always been exceptional. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Detroit, his intellectual brilliance was evident from an early age. By 16, he was already creating basic software programs on a second-hand computer his mother had sacrificed to purchase. Despite their financial limitations, Lawrence's mother, Elaine Jackson, had nurtured his talents with unwavering dedication. Elaine had worked as a domestic worker for wealthy families since Lawrence's father died of a heart attack when Lawrence was just 10 years old. Day after day, she cleaned homes, did laundry, and prepared meals for families who barely acknowledged her existence. Her hands grew calloused and her back ached perpetually, but she never complained. Every dollar she earned beyond their basic necessities went toward Lawrence's education fund. "Education is the one thing they can never take away from you," she would tell him while rubbing ointment on her swollen feet after 14-hour workdays. Her sacrifice paid off when Lawrence received a full scholarship to attend Harvard University, where he studied computer science. Even with the scholarship, Elaine worked extra hours to send him money for books, appropriate clothing, and the occasional pizza when he studied late. Lawrence graduated summa cum laude, then immediately entered Harvard Business School, where his innovative ideas about supply chain management technology began to take shape. After graduation, while his classmates took lucrative positions at established companies, Lawrence decided to forge his own path. With $5,000 saved from campus jobs and a small loan from his mother's credit union, he founded Jackson Tech in a tiny rented office space in Boston. The early years were lean, with Lawrence often sleeping on a futon in his office and subsisting on ramen noodles while coding through the night. Jackson Tech's breakthrough came 3 years later when Lawrence developed an algorithm that could predict supply chain disruptions before they occurred, allowing companies to make proactive adjustments. His software platform revolutionized how businesses manage their logistics, reducing costs by an average of 22%. Within 18 months, Jackson Tech grew from 3 employees to 65, with a client list that included several Fortune 500 companies. Lawrence isn't just building software, he's reimagining the entire supply chain ecosystem, raved Tech Weekly magazine, which featured him on their cover at age 32. The article dubbed him the supply chain savant. At 35, Lawrence had built Jackson Tech into a company valued at over $600 million. His innovation had disrupted an industry dominated by older, established firms, including Montgomery Industries, a century-old technology conglomerate led by Richard Montgomery, a fourth-generation heir to the company. Montgomery Industries had been struggling to compete with Jackson Tech's superior technology. After several failed attempts to develop competing software, Richard Montgomery made a decision. If you can't beat them, buy them. He approached Lawrence with an acquisition offer that initially shocked the younger entrepreneur, $900 million. "With our resources and your innovation, we could transform the industry," Richard told Lawrence during their first meeting at Montgomery's penthouse office overlooking Central Park. "You've built something remarkable, and I respect self-made success." Lawrence was cautiously optimistic. The amount would secure not just his future, but would allow him to ensure his mother never worked another day in her life. He could establish the educational foundation for underprivileged youth he'd always dreamed of creating. The possibilities seemed endless. The initial meetings went surprisingly well. Richard appeared genuinely impressed with Lawrence's vision and technological innovations. The Montgomery team, mostly older white men in expensive suits, asked thoughtful questions about Jackson Tech's architecture and scalability potential. There were subtle warning signs, however. Occasional comments about being surprisingly articulate, or questions about whether Lawrence had help developing his algorithms raised his internal alarms. During one meeting, Richard's son Bradley asked Lawrence if he had played basketball in college, despite Lawrence's slight build, making it obvious he wasn't an athlete. "Harvard isn't known for their basketball program," Lawrence had responded evenly, redirecting the conversation back to technology. Lawrence's vice president of operations, Tiffany Chen, had expressed concerns after several meetings with the Montgomery team. Tiffany, who had worked at several major tech firms before joining Jackson Tech, had heard rumors about the Montgomery family's treatment of minority employees and partners. "There's something about them that doesn't sit right with me," she confided to Lawrence after a particularly tense negotiation session. Richard smiles, but it never reaches his eyes. "I appreciate your concern," Lawrence had replied, "but this deal would change everything for us. For my mom. After everything she's sacrificed, I can finally give her the life she deserves." As the negotiations progressed and the lawyers hammered out the final details, Richard Montgomery invited Lawrence and his team to a pre-signing reception at the Montgomery estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The contract would be formally signed the following morning. "Bring someone special," Richard had said. "This is a momentous occasion worth celebrating with family." Lawrence immediately knew he wanted his mother there. Elaine had recently retired from domestic work at Lawrence's insistence, though she still volunteered at a community center teaching English to immigrants. Lawrence had already purchased a comfortable house for her in a quiet neighborhood, but with this deal, he could provide so much more. "Mom, I want you to come to this reception with me," Lawrence told her over the phone. "This is happening because of you. Everything I've accomplished is because of your sacrifice." Elaine was hesitant. "Those fancy parties aren't for people like me, Lawrence. I wouldn't know how to act or what to say." "You raised me to walk with my head high no matter the room," Lawrence reminded her. "I want you by my side for this, please." Eventually, she agreed. Lawrence arranged for a personal shopper to help his mother select an elegant gown for the event, and booked her a suite at the Four Seasons in Manhattan. Everything seemed perfect as they prepared to attend what should have been a celebration of Lawrence's journey from that small Detroit apartment to the pinnacle of business success. Neither of them could have predicted how dramatically everything would change in a single evening. The Montgomery estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured perfection in Greenwich, Connecticut. As Lawrence's town car passed through the wrought iron gates, he squeezed his mother's hand reassuringly. Elaine Jackson looked stunning in a royal blue evening gown, her silver hair elegantly styled, yet her eyes betrayed her nervousness. "Remember what you always told me?" Lawrence asked gently. "Walk in like you belong." Elaine smiled, touching the simple pearl necklace Lawrence had given her for her 60th birthday. "You belong here, son. That's what matters." The ballroom of the Montgomery mansion glittered with crystal chandeliers and old money opulence. A string quartet played softly in one corner while uniformed staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The room was filled with Montgomery Industries executives, board members, and members of Connecticut's elite social circles, almost exclusively white faces in a sea of wealth and privilege. Lawrence guided his mother through the entrance, standing tall in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Several executives he recognized from negotiations nodded in acknowledgement, some approaching to offer congratulations on the impending deal. Tiffany Chen arrived moments later, immediately joining Lawrence and Elaine. "Mrs. Jackson, you look absolutely beautiful," Tiffany said warmly, embracing the older woman. "Please call me Elaine," she replied. "And thank you for looking out for my son. He speaks very highly of you." Richard Montgomery approached with his family in tow. At 62, Richard carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never heard the word no. His wife Victoria, a slender woman with an immaculate blonde bob and a face suspiciously free of wrinkles, assessed Lawrence and Elaine with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lawrence, welcome to our home," Richard boomed, shaking Lawrence's hand firmly. "And this must be your mother?" "Yes, this is my mother, Elaine Jackson," Lawrence said proudly. "Mom, this is Richard Montgomery, his wife Victoria, their son Bradley, and daughter Kendall." Bradley Montgomery, in his early 30s with his father's build but none of his restraint, gave Lawrence a perfunctory handshake before his eyes slid past Elaine without acknowledgement. Kendall, a willowy 20-something whose Instagram influence exceeded her actual accomplishments, barely glanced up from her phone. "How nice," Victoria said, her eyes sweeping over Elaine. "You know, we're actually short-staffed tonight. Our regular caterer brought fewer servers than promised." Lawrence stiffened. "My mother is here as my guest, Mrs. Montgomery." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course, I just meant, never mind. Please, enjoy yourselves." As the Montgomerys moved away to greet other guests, Lawrence noticed his mother's smile had faltered slightly. Before he could say anything, a senior vice president from Montgomery Industries approached with questions about integration timelines, pulling Lawrence into a business conversation. Across the room, Elaine stood alone, clutching her small evening purse. A server offered her champagne, which she declined politely. She observed her son in his element, confident, articulate, respected. Her chest swelled with pride. "Excuse me," a sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Victoria Montgomery. "The restrooms for staff are down the hallway past the kitchen." "I'm not staff," Elaine replied calmly. "I'm Lawrence Jackson's mother." Victoria's expression flickered between embarrassment and something harder to define. "My mistake. The guest bathrooms are upstairs, first door on the right." As Victoria walked away, Elaine overheard her murmur to another guest, "She looks exactly like our former housekeeper." When Elaine found the upstairs bathroom, a young woman who appeared to be part of the household staff stopped her. "Ma'am, this area is for family and guests only. Service personnel should use the facilities near the kitchen." "I am a guest," Elaine explained patiently. "I'm Lawrence Jackson's mother." The young woman's expression registered disbelief before she stepped aside reluctantly. Similar interactions continued throughout the evening. Servers would approach Elaine with trays, then express surprise when she took a canapé instead of adjusting the arrangement. Guests would begin conversations, then awkwardly drift away when they realized she wasn't there to refill their drinks. Meanwhile, Lawrence was continuously engaged in conversation with Montgomery executives and board members, occasionally scanning the room for his mother, but repeatedly pulled into discussions about transition plans and future innovations. Tiffany noticed Elaine's isolation and made her way across the room. "Everything okay, Elaine?" Elaine forced a smile. "Just feeling a bit out of place? Lawrence is busy, as he should be." "These people aren't worth your discomfort," Tiffany said quietly. "I've worked with their type my entire career. They smile while looking right through you." "I'm used to it, dear," Elaine replied. "I cleaned houses like this for 40 years. Richard Montgomery appeared suddenly, champagne in hand. "Ah, Lawrence's mother. Tell me, what do you think of our little gathering?" "Your home is very beautiful," Elaine replied politely. Richard laughed too loudly. "I bet it's quite different from what you're used to. You know, Lawrence has done remarkably well for himself, considering, well, his background." He leaned closer. "Between us, you must feel more comfortable in the kitchen than the ballroom, I know I would." Before Elaine could respond, Richard was called away by another guest. Tiffany squeezed Elaine's arm supportively. Across the room, Bradley Montgomery held court with several friends, their laughter carrying. "Dad's really going all out with this diversity hire, isn't he?" he said, loud enough to be overheard. $900 million for the optics of a black-owned acquisition. The board eats that inclusion crap up." A waiter passing by Elaine stumbled slightly, spilling champagne on the sleeve of her gown. "Sorry," he muttered without stopping, leaving Elaine to blot the stain with a cocktail napkin, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Lawrence finally broke away from a conversation with board members, scanning the room for his mother. When he spotted her standing alone near a column, he began making his way toward her, only to be intercepted by Richard. "Lawrence, there's someone you absolutely must meet," Richard insisted, steering him toward an elderly man. "This is Walter Pembroke, our largest shareholder." By the time Lawrence extricated himself, Elaine had disappeared from view. Concerned, he asked Tiffany if she'd seen his mother. Last I saw, she was headed toward the terrace, Tiffany said, her expression troubled. Lawrence, I don't think she's being treated well. I've noticed several incidents. Lawrence frowned. What do you mean? Victoria Montgomery mistook her for staff, twice. And Bradley's been making comments within earshot. Nothing direct, but… Lawrence's jaw tightened. Find her for me? I need to wrap up one conversation, then I'll join you. As Tiffany went in search of Elaine, Lawrence couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The subtle slights and microaggressions he'd dismissed during negotiations suddenly seemed more significant in light of how the evening was unfolding. He wondered if he'd been too willing to overlook warning signs in pursuit of the deal. Little did he know, the worst was yet to come. What happens when years of hard work and sacrifice culminate in a moment of profound disrespect? What choices would you make if forced to choose between wealth and dignity? The next phase of Lawrence and Elaine's evening at the Montgomery estate would test their resilience in ways they never anticipated. Victoria Montgomery stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of Greenwich's social elite, old money families who measured their lineage in generations and their worth in billions. Her laugh tinkled like the crystal champagne flutes being carried by servers as she held court. Elaine, Elaine, come over here, Victoria called out loudly, waving imperiously as if summoning a servant. Conversations nearby quieted as Elaine, who had been speaking quietly with Tiffany near the terrace doors, looked up in surprise. All eyes turned to her. Yes, you, Victoria continued, beckoning insistently. Come here, please. Elaine walked slowly toward the group, conscious of the stares following her progress across the marble floor. Tiffany moved to accompany her, but a Montgomery executive intercepted her with questions about Jackson Tech's cloud infrastructure, effectively blocking her path. Everyone, this is Lawrence Jackson's mother, Victoria announced as Elaine joined the circle. Elaine worked as a domestic for decades. Didn't you, Elaine? Yes, I did, Elaine answered with dignity. I'm very proud of the work I did to put my son through college. Victoria smiled thinly. How quaint. Elaine, these ladies and I were just discussing the impossibility of finding good help these days. Perhaps you could share some of your cleaning secrets. I'm sure you know all the best tricks for getting rid of difficult stains. The women tittered behind their hands as Elaine stood frozen in the spotlight of their collective gaze. From across the room, Lawrence was deep in conversation with the Montgomery Industries board chairman, unaware of his mother's predicament. I specialized in maintaining homes to the standards my employers expected, Elaine replied carefully. But I'm here tonight as Lawrence's guest, not in a professional capacity. Of course, Victoria said dismissively. But while you're here, my housekeeper just can't get the marble in the guest bathroom properly polished. What would you recommend? Kendall Montgomery, who had been documenting the evening on her phone, snapped several photos of Elaine's uncomfortable expression, laughing with her friends as they huddled over the images. This is totally going on my private story, she whispered loudly enough for Elaine to hear. Across the ballroom, Richard Montgomery tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. As the room quieted, he began a speech about the historic acquisition. Tomorrow marks a significant milestone for Montgomery Industries, he announced proudly. Our acquisition of Jackson Tech represents our commitment to diversity and inclusion in the technology sector. Lawrence, standing near the chairman, felt a slight discomfort at the framing. His company was being acquired for its revolutionary technology and market position, not as a diversity initiative. Richard continued, in today's business climate, optics matter. This acquisition checks an important box for our shareholders and board. He chuckled, raising his glass toward Lawrence. And the technology isn't half bad either. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd as Lawrence maintained his professional smile, though his discomfort grew. Near the back of the room, two Montgomery vice presidents spoke in hushed tones that carried just far enough for Tiffany to overhear. $900 million is steep for what's essentially a PR move, one said. Richard knows what he's doing, the other replied. We'll strip the assets, absorb the client list, and let the diversity hire play figurehead for a while before a convenient reorganization. Tiffany's eyes widened as she immediately began searching for Lawrence, intent on sharing what she'd heard. Meanwhile, Victoria had moved Elaine toward the center of the room, ostensibly to introduce her to more guests, but effectively putting her on display. "And after working in homes like ours for so many years, how strange it must be to be a guest in one," Victoria said loudly. "Though I'm sure if we're short-staffed, you wouldn't mind clearing a few plates. Old habits and all that." She laughed as if she'd made a clever joke. Elaine's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "I've never been ashamed of honest work, Mrs. Montgomery. My job allowed my son to become the man he is today." "How touching," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "A true hallmark moment." "Do you think Elaine should confront Victoria directly or maintain her dignity in silence? Comment number 1 if you believe she should stand up for herself, or number 2 if keeping her composure is the better strategy. Hit that like button if you admire her strength in this difficult situation, and subscribe to see how Lawrence responds when he discovers what's happening. Bradley Montgomery, emboldened by several scotches and the encouraging laughter of his friends, clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his words slightly slurred. "To new partnerships and knowing your place in them." His friends snickered as Bradley continued. "To Lawrence Jackson, who climbed so high despite starting so low." His gaze drifted meaningfully toward Elaine. "And to his mother, who clearly taught him how to clean up in the business world." Lawrence, finally noticing the commotion, began moving toward his mother just as Richard Montgomery created the crescendo moment of the evening. Richard approached Elaine, holding his empty plate and used napkin. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. "When you're done here, could you clear this and bring me another canapé platter? The kitchen seems understaffed tonight." The room fell into an awkward silence as Elaine stood perfectly still, her expression frozen in dignified pain. A single tear tracked down her cheek as she finally spoke. "I'm not serving staff, Mr. Montgomery. I'm Lawrence Jackson's mother." Richard blinked, feigning surprise poorly. "Oh, my mistake. You just looked so, well, you know." He glanced around at his guests, many of whom chuckled uncomfortably. Lawrence had finally pushed his way through the crowd, arriving at his mother's side just in time to hear Richard's comment and see the tear on his mother's cheek. In that moment, everything changed. What would you do if you witnessed someone you love being publicly humiliated? How far would you go to defend their dignity? The confrontation that followed would alter the trajectory of both families forever. Lawrence Jackson felt a cold fury unlike anything he had experienced before. The sight of his mother's tear-streaked face crystallized everything in an instant. The subtle dismissals during negotiations, the veiled comments, the entire evening's parade of indignities. "Mom," he said gently, taking her hand. "Are you all right?" Elaine quickly wiped her cheek. "I'm fine, Lawrence. Just a misunderstanding." Richard Montgomery cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Indeed, just a simple mistake. No harm intended." Lawrence fixed Richard with a stare that silenced him mid-sentence. "Excuse us," he said to the onlookers, guiding his mother away from the crowd. Tiffany immediately joined them, leading them to a quiet alcove off the main ballroom. "What happened?" Lawrence asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Elaine shook her head. "It's nothing, Lawrence. Please, don't make a scene. This deal is too important." "Mom, tell me the truth," Lawrence insisted. "What's been happening tonight?" "Your mother has been treated like the help all evening," Tiffany interjected when Elaine hesitated. "Victoria Montgomery explicitly directed her to use the service entrance bathrooms. Bradley has been making comments within earshot, and just now, Richard himself mistook her for catering staff." Lawrence's jaw tightened as he turned back to his mother. "Is this true?" Elaine sighed, finally allowing her pain to show. "Lawrence, I've dealt with people like this my entire life. It's nothing new." "That doesn't make it right," Lawrence replied, his voice breaking slightly. A young woman in catering uniform approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say, they've been awful to your mother all night." Mrs. Montgomery told the staff to treat her like she was one of us, not a guest. She said we should help her remember her place. Lawrence thanked the woman, who quickly disappeared back into the crowd. His expression hardened as he scanned the room, spotting Bradley Montgomery laughing with his friends near the bar. "Wait here," he told his mother and Tiffany, striding purposefully across the ballroom. Bradley noticed Lawrence's approach and straightened, his smile faltering slightly. "Jackson, having a good time? Great party, right?" "I need to speak with you about how my mother has been treated tonight," Lawrence said evenly. Bradley's expression shifted from faux friendliness to dismissive arrogance. "Look, if there's been some misunderstanding with the staff..." "The misunderstanding," Lawrence cut in, "is that you thought it was acceptable to disrespect my mother in any way." Bradley scoffed. "Don't be so sensitive. No one meant anything by it." "I think you did," Lawrence replied. "I think every slight, every comment, every mistake was deliberately calculated." "You're overreacting," Bradley said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Maybe this is why these deals are so tricky, cultural differences in how we communicate." Before Lawrence could respond, Victoria Montgomery appeared at her son's side. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her smile brittle. "Yes," Lawrence stated plainly. "My mother has been repeatedly disrespected in your home tonight." Victoria's expression remained fixed in its social mask. "I'm sorry if she felt that way. Perhaps there was confusion because of her background. I simply assumed she worked in service given her demeanor and appearance." "Her appearance?" Lawrence echoed incredulously. "You mean her skin color?" "That's not what I said," Victoria replied sharply. "Don't put words in my mouth." Richard Montgomery joined the growing confrontation, placing a hand on Lawrence's shoulder that was immediately shrugged off. "Lawrence, let's discuss this privately," Richard suggested, guiding him away from the curious onlookers. Once they were in a side room, Richard closed the door and his demeanor changed completely. "Look, I apologize if your mother felt uncomfortable. These events can be intimidating for people not accustomed to our social circle." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "Let me make this right. Would $10,000 ease her discomfort?" Lawrence stared at Richard in disbelief. "You think you can buy her dignity?" Richard's expression hardened. "I'm trying to be generous here. This deal is worth $900 million. Are you really going to jeopardize that over some perceived slight?" "Perceived," Lawrence repeated. "Your wife directed my mother to use the service entrance. Your son made racist comments within her hearing, and you personally mistook her for the help despite her evening gown and the fact that she was introduced to you as my mother." Richard put away his checkbook. "If you're going to be difficult about this, perhaps we need to reconsider certain aspects of tomorrow's agreement. Are you threatening to alter the deal?" "I'm suggesting that business requires a certain pragmatism," Richard replied coldly. "Montgomery Industries has existed for over a century. We'll be here long after your little startup is forgotten. Walking away from this deal would be professional suicide for you." Lawrence fell silent, thinking of everything that had led to this moment. He remembered his mother working 3 jobs, her hands raw from cleaning chemicals. He recalled her missing his middle school graduation because she couldn't get time off, how she'd cried when he told her about it later. He thought about her sacrificing meals so he could have new school supplies, her unfailing belief in his potential despite a system designed for him to fail. The door opened, and Tiffany entered without knocking, tablet in hand. "Lawrence, you need to see this," she said urgently, handing him the device. "I had our team do some emergency research. Montgomery Industries has been sued 8 times for racial discrimination in the past decade. All cases were settled privately with NDAs, and there's more." Lawrence scanned the information, his expression darkening with each swipe of the screen. Finally, he looked up at Richard. "Your company has systematically underpaid minority employees, blocked promotions, and fired pregnant women," Lawrence summarized. "And you've used your legal team to silence them all." "Ancient history," Richard dismissed. Every major corporation has similar skeletons. No, Lawrence said quietly. Not like this. Richard's patience visibly evaporated. Let me be perfectly clear. If you walk away from this deal, I will personally ensure that no major company in this industry ever does business with you again. Your investors will abandon you, your clients will disappear, and that little company you built will be worth pennies within a year. Is that what you want? All because your mother's feelings were hurt at a party? Lawrence thought about the schools he planned to fund, the opportunities the deal would create, the security it would provide for his team and his mother. Then he remembered what Elaine had taught him from his earliest days. Your dignity isn't for sale, Lawrence. Not for any price. My mother didn't just have her feelings hurt, Lawrence said finally. She was dehumanized in front of a room full of people who were too cowardly or too complicit to say anything. And you've made it abundantly clear that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It's who you are. So what are you going to do about it? Richard challenged. Lawrence straightened his shoulders. I'm going to walk out of here with my mother and my dignity intact. And tomorrow, there will be no deal. Richard's face flushed with anger. You're making a catastrophic mistake. No, Lawrence replied calmly. For the first time tonight, I'm absolutely certain I'm doing the right thing. He turned to leave, but Richard grabbed his arm. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy everything you've built. Lawrence removed Richard's hand from his arm. You can try. Rejoining his mother and Tiffany in the ballroom, Lawrence offered Elaine his arm. We're leaving, Mom. The deal? She asked worriedly. Some things are more important than money, he replied. You taught me that. As they walked toward the exit, heads turning to watch their departure, Bradley Montgomery called out mockingly, Leaving so soon? The help usually stays to clean up. Lawrence paused, considering a response, but Elaine squeezed his arm. He's not worth it, son. With dignity intact but futures uncertain, Lawrence, Elaine, and Tiffany walked out of the Montgomery estate into the cool Connecticut night, leaving behind $900 million and a roomful of stunned socialites. The true test of their resolve would come with the dawn. The morning after the Montgomery reception dawned gray and rainy in Boston, matching the mood at Jackson Tech headquarters. Lawrence had called an emergency meeting of his executive team at 7 a.m., the conference room buzzing with tension and uncertainty as he explained his decision to walk away from the Montgomery deal. So, that's where we stand, Lawrence concluded, having detailed the events of the previous evening. I understand this impacts all of you, and I take full responsibility for that. Benjamin Williams, Jackson Tech's chief financial officer and Lawrence's friend since Harvard, was the first to respond. The markets are going to react badly. Our stock will take a significant hit. I'm aware, Lawrence replied grimly. $900 million, Lawrence, Benjamin continued, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. That's life-changing money for everyone in this company. Tiffany Chen interjected firmly. I was there. You didn't see how they treated Elaine. It was unconscionable. I'm not questioning Lawrence's moral stance, Benjamin clarified. I'm pointing out the practical reality we now face. Montgomery Industries is a vindictive corporate giant with connections throughout the industry. As if on cue, Lawrence's phone buzzed with a news alert. He put it on speaker for the room to hear. Breaking business news. Jackson Tech stock plummets 28% in pre-market trading after rumors that the expected Montgomery Industries acquisition has fallen through. Sources close to Montgomery suggest Jackson Tech failed technical due diligence requirements, raising concerns about the company's core technology. Lawrence silenced the phone. They're already spinning a narrative. They control media relationships we can only dream of. Alicia Sanders, the head of marketing, noted worriedly. This is going to get ugly fast. Lawrence nodded, his expression resolute despite his sleepless night. I need each of you to contact our major clients personally. Explain that we remain committed to their success and that our technology and support are unaffected. As the team dispersed with their assignments, Lawrence retreated to his office to make the hardest call of the morning, to his investors. The largest, Vanguard Ventures, was not pleased. "We invested based on the planned acquisition, Lawrence," said Gerald Hoffman, Vanguard's managing partner. "This is a significant deviation from the strategy you presented to our investment committee." "I understand your concern," Lawrence replied. "But the terms Montgomery was suggesting at the 11th hour would have gutted our company's culture and mission." It wasn't entirely untrue. The disrespect shown to his mother had revealed Montgomery's true intentions for Jackson Tech's future. "The board will want to meet," Hoffman warned before ending the call. By midday, the situation had deteriorated further. Montgomery Industries had released an official statement expressing disappointment that Jackson Tech's technology failed to meet basic security and scalability requirements during final technical review, despite having completed extensive technical due diligence weeks earlier. Business news channels were running the story on constant rotation, with industry experts, many with ties to Montgomery, questioning Jackson Tech's viability without the acquisition. The company's stock had fallen 34% by noon. Lawrence sat with his mother in his condo that evening, both exhausted from the day's events. Elaine had been quiet since they'd left the Montgomery estate, carrying a burden of guilt despite Lawrence's assurances. "I should never have gone to that reception," she said softly, staring into her untouched cup of tea. "All of this is happening because of me." "No, Mom," Lawrence said firmly. "This is happening because Richard Montgomery and his family showed their true colors. You didn't do anything wrong." "But your company, Lawrence, everything you've worked for, is still there," he finished for her. "The technology hasn't changed. Our team hasn't changed. We just need to weather this storm." Elaine reached across the table to take her son's hand. "You gave up so much because of me." "I gave up nothing that matters," Lawrence corrected her. "Money comes and goes, but dignity, that's what you taught me to value above all else." Their moment was interrupted by Lawrence's phone ringing. It was Tiffany. "Lawrence, Paradigm Software just canceled their contract. Their CEO said they received a call directly from Richard Montgomery suggesting our platform might become unsupported in the near future." Lawrence's jaw tightened. "Paradigm was 15% of our recurring revenue." "It gets worse," Tiffany continued. "Atlantic Commerce and TechSphere are both reviewing their options according to their procurement departments." After the call ended, Lawrence explained the situation to his mother, whose expression fell further. "He's trying to destroy you," she whispered. "He's trying," Lawrence agreed. "But he won't succeed." The following morning brought another crisis. First National Bank, which held Jackson Tech's business loans and line of credit, had sent a formal notice reviewing their lending terms based on material changes in business outlook. They were calling in a $2 million loan that had previously been established with favorable long-term rates. "They can't just change the terms," Lawrence argued on the phone with the bank's vice president. "Actually, Section 23(b) of your agreement allows adjustment based on substantial changes in company valuation, which has occurred," the banker replied mechanically. "We'll need the balance satisfied within 30 days. Benjamin William looked grim as he reviewed the company finances. "We have enough cash to cover it, but it will severely impact our operating runway. We'd need to consider staffing reductions to extend our viability." "No layoffs," Lawrence said firmly. "These people believed in us. I won't punish them for my decision." "Lawrence," Benjamin said carefully, "I respect what you did. God knows I would have done the same if someone treated my mother that way. But from a purely financial perspective, we have to consider all options." "Find another way," Lawrence insisted. "Cut my salary to zero if necessary." As the week progressed, the pattern became clear. Montgomery Industries was systematically cutting off Jackson Tech's oxygen. Major clients were exiting their contracts under pressure. Potential investors suddenly became unreachable. Even the commercial real estate company that leased them office space discovered problems with their building code compliance that had never been issues before. Lawrence maintained a brave face for his team, but privately, the strain was taking its toll. He had started building Jackson Tech with nothing but determination and talent. The prospect of watching it crumble despite having a superior product was almost unbearable. Elaine noticed her son's deteriorating condition as he visited her on Sunday, having lost weight and developing dark circles under his eyes. "You're not sleeping," she observed, placing a plate of food in front of him that he barely touched. "I'm fine, Mom." "Don't lie to me, Lawrence Jackson. I didn't raise you to lie." He managed a small smile at her familiar admonishment. "We're facing some challenges at work." "Because of what happened with the Montgomerys?" Lawrence nodded reluctantly. "Richard is influential. He's making things difficult." Elaine sat across from him, her expression troubled. "Maybe you should call him. Try to salvage something." "No," Lawrence said firmly. "That's not an option." "I hate seeing you suffer because of me," Elaine said, her voice breaking slightly. "This isn't your fault, Mom, and we're going to get through it." His phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany. "Emergency. Call me ASAP." Stepping away to make the call, Lawrence heard the worst news yet. Tiffany had discovered through an industry contact that Montgomery Industries was developing a clone of Jackson Tech's core technology, using information they had obtained during the acquisition due diligence process. "They can't do that," Lawrence said. "The NDAs they signed specifically prohibited using our technical documentation for any purpose other than evaluation." "They're doing it anyway," Tiffany replied. "And they've hired David Reynolds." Lawrence felt his stomach drop. David had been Jackson Tech's lead architect until 6 months ago when he left for a startup that subsequently failed. He knew the code base intimately. With David helping them, they could have a competing product within months, Lawrence realized aloud. "Exactly. And with their market reach, they could effectively make us obsolete." When Lawrence ended the call, he found his mother watching him with concern. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Lawrence couldn't lie to her. "Yes, but I'm not giving up." That night, as Elaine prepared for bed in the guest room of Lawrence's condo, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. Dismissing it as indigestion, she took an antacid and lay down, but the pain intensified, spreading to her left arm and jaw. Lawrence found her an hour later when he heard a thump from her room. Elaine was on the floor beside the bed, clutching her chest and struggling to breathe. "Mom!" he cried out, rushing to her side and immediately dialing 911. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly determining she was having a heart attack. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Elaine clutched Lawrence's hand. "Not your fault," she whispered before they placed an oxygen mask over her face. In the hospital waiting room, as doctors worked to save his mother, Lawrence faced the darkest moment of his life. Everything that mattered to him, his mother, his company, his life's work, seemed to be slipping away simultaneously. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Benjamin Williams. "Not a good time, Ben," Lawrence answered wearily. "Lawrence, I'm sorry to bother you, but the board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're discussing a leadership change." The final blow had fallen. Now Lawrence would have to fight not just for his company's survival, but for his position within it. And somewhere across the country, in a Greenwich mansion, Richard Montgomery was likely celebrating his impending victory. But something had changed in Lawrence as he sat in that sterile hospital waiting room. The despair that had been creeping in was burned away by a new, cold determination. Richard Montgomery had made this personal by attacking his mother's dignity. Now, seeing her fighting for her life under the stress this situation had caused, Lawrence resolved that this would not be the end of his story. He would find a way to fight back. How far would you go to defend your family's honor? What would you sacrifice to stand up against injustice? Lawrence Jackson was about to discover his own answers to these questions as he faced the most challenging chapter of his professional life. 3 weeks after the fateful Montgomery reception, Jackson Tech was in crisis mode. Montgomery Industries had launched a coordinated assault on multiple fronts, using their considerable influence to isolate Lawrence's company from potential investors, partners, and clients. Lawrence sat in his office reviewing the latest damage reports. 5 more clients had terminated their contracts in the past week alone. The company's stock had fallen 62% from its pre-Montgomery deal levels. Venture capital firms that had once eagerly pursued meetings with Lawrence now wouldn't return his calls. "They're systematically cutting off our oxygen," Tiffany observed, reviewing the latest financial projections with Lawrence and Benjamin. "At this burn rate, we have maybe 4 months of runway left." Benjamin nodded grimly. "And that's assuming no further client departures, which seems unlikely given Montgomery's campaign against us." Lawrence stared out the window at the Boston skyline, his expression hardened by weeks of battle. "Have we had any luck securing new investment?" "Everyone's running scared," Benjamin replied. "Richard Montgomery has apparently been explicit in his warnings to the venture capital community. Anyone who invests in Jackson Tech will find themselves excluded from deals with Montgomery Industries and their numerous portfolio companies." "It's economic blackmail," Tiffany added bitterly. Lawrence turned back to face his most trusted executives. "And the board meeting?" Benjamin winced slightly. "I've managed to hold them off for now, but they're getting nervous. Johnson and Peterson are firmly in your corner, but the others are wavering. They're talking about bringing in experienced leadership to navigate the current challenges. In other words, they want to replace me with someone who'll sell to Montgomery at a discount," Lawrence translated. "Essentially, yes." The situation was dire, but Lawrence refused to surrender. His mother had been released from the hospital a week after her heart attack, but the event had left her weakened. The doctors had been clear that stress had been a significant contributor to her condition. "Do you believe Lawrence should fight back against the Montgomerys with everything he has? Or try to find a peaceful resolution to save his company? Comment number 1 if you think he should launch a counteroffensive, or number 2 if he should seek compromise. Like this video if you're inspired by his unwavering principles, and subscribe to see his next move in this high-stakes battle." Lawrence's phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have let it go to voicemail given the crisis at hand, but something compelled him to answer. "Lawrence Jackson speaking." "Mr. Jackson, my name is Diana Watson. I'm Richard Montgomery's executive assistant. I need to speak with you urgently, but not over the phone. Can we meet?" Lawrence's suspicion was immediate. "How do I know this isn't some kind of trap?" "Because I'm risking my career and possibly more by contacting you," she replied, her voice tense. "I've worked for Richard for 8 years. I know what he's doing to your company, and I can't be part of it anymore." After consulting with Tiffany and Benjamin, Lawrence agreed to meet Diana at a quiet coffee shop in Cambridge, far from both companies' offices. Tiffany insisted on accompanying him as a precaution. Diana Watson proved to be a slender woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and a perpetually worried expression. She glanced nervously around the cafe before speaking in hushed tones. "First, I want you to know that what happened to your mother was planned," she began without preamble. "Victoria and Richard discussed it beforehand. They wanted to see if they could provoke you into doing something that would give them leverage in the final negotiations." Lawrence's expression darkened. "They deliberately humiliated my mother as a negotiating tactic?" Diana nodded grimly. "Richard never intended to honor the $900 million valuation. The plan was to create an incident that would allow him to renegotiate at the last minute, claiming your unprofessional behavior had created new concerns." "That's despicable," Tiffany said. "It gets worse," Diana continued. "After you walked away, Richard became obsessed with destroying Jackson Tech. I've worked for difficult executives before, but this is different. It's personal for him now." "Why are you telling us this?" Lawrence asked. Diana hesitated. "Because what they're doing is wrong, and because—" She reached into her bag and removed a USB drive. "Because they're not just trying to ruin your business. They're breaking the law." The drive contained internal emails, financial records, and strategy documents from Montgomery Industries. As Diana explained, Richard had been engaged in a pattern of unethical and potentially illegal business practices for years, including systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion, price-fixing arrangements with supposed competitors, falsification of environmental compliance data, bribery of foreign officials for contracts, tax evasion through elaborate offshore structures. "He's untouchable inside the company," Diana explained. "The board is packed with his friends and family members, The few who have questioned his methods have been forced out. Lawrence studied the materials, his mind racing with possibilities. "This is incredibly risky for you," he observed. Diana nodded. "My father worked for Montgomery Industries for 32 years. When he developed Parkinson's, they found a way to terminate him just before his pension would have vested. I took this job hoping to change things from the inside, but that was naive." After Diana left, Lawrence, Tiffany, and Benjamin spent hours reviewing the documents. "This is explosive," Benjamin said finally. "But using it carries significant risks. Whistleblower or not, these documents were obtained through questionable means. And Montgomery's legal team would bury us in litigation," Tiffany added. Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. "We need to be strategic. This isn't just about saving Jackson Tech anymore. It's about stopping Richard Montgomery from continuing to harm people." The following day, while Elaine rested at home under the care of a nurse, Lawrence convened a secret strategy session with his core team. The conference room blinds were drawn, phones were collected at the door, and network connectivity was disabled to prevent any possibility of leaks. "Montgomery tried to steal our technology," Lawrence began. "But what he doesn't know is that I've been working nights on a complete redesign of our core architecture." He pulled up technical diagrams on the screen, showing a revolutionary new approach to supply chain management that went far beyond their current offering. "This isn't just an improvement," Tiffany realized, studying the specifications. "This is a quantum leap." Lawrence nodded. "Montgomery's trying to copy our existing platform. Let him. By the time they get it to market, it'll be obsolete." Benjamin looked skeptical. "Development costs for something this ambitious would be enormous, and our runway is shrinking by the day." "That's where we need to get creative," Lawrence replied. "We can't access traditional investment right now, so we need to find partners who aren't vulnerable to Montgomery's influence." Lawrence revealed that he had already begun confidential discussions with Montgomery's 3 largest competitors. Rather than seeking acquisition, he was proposing a strategic partnership model where Jackson Tech would remain independent but provide exclusive technology advantages to these partners in their respective market segments. "Divide and conquer," Tiffany said with dawning appreciation. "None of them could challenge Montgomery alone, but together." "Exactly," Lawrence confirmed. "And with Diana's information, we have leverage that goes beyond business. We're not going to use it for blackmail. That would make us no better than Richard. But it does give us insight into Montgomery's vulnerabilities." As the team refined their counter-strategy, Lawrence received an unexpected call. Elaine's condition had worsened, and she was being readmitted to the hospital. Lawrence rushed to her side, temporarily setting aside business concerns. Sitting beside his mother's hospital bed, watching her breathe with the assistance of oxygen, Lawrence felt a renewed sense of purpose. Everything she had sacrificed for him, every indignity she had suffered to give him opportunities, it all came into sharp focus. "I won't let them win, Mom," he promised the sleeping Elaine. "Not just for Jackson Tech, but for every person they've ever mistreated." When he returned to the office the following day, Lawrence brought with him a clarity and determination that inspired his beleaguered team. Their counteroffensive would proceed on multiple fronts. Accelerated development of the next-generation platform, codenamed Phoenix. 2. Strategic partnerships with Montgomery's competitors. 3. Careful, legal use of Diana's information to neutralize Montgomery's attacks. 4. A complete reframing of their public narrative, from victims to innovators. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of 18-hour workdays, cold takeout, and the kind of focused energy that comes from fighting for survival. Lawrence led by example, coding alongside his development team, joining sales calls with potential partners, and personally reassuring nervous employees about the company's future. Then came the breakthrough they desperately needed. Charles Montgomery, Victoria's estranged brother who had been forced out of the family business a decade earlier, reached out after hearing about the conflict through industry channels. "Richard destroyed my relationship with my sister, took my stake in the company for pennies on the dollar. and has been running Montgomery Industries into the ground with his ego and outdated thinking, Charles explained during their first meeting. I've been waiting for an opportunity to back someone who could challenge him. Charles offered emergency funding that would extend Jackson Tech's runway by at least 6 months, enough time to bring Phoenix to market. In return, he wanted a board seat and the satisfaction of seeing his brother-in-law face real competition. With this lifeline secured, Lawrence's team executed their plan with precision. They approached James Wilson, CEO of Wilson Technologies and Montgomery's most ambitious competitor, with a partnership proposal that would give Wilson early access to Phoenix. Montgomery has dominated this space for too long, Wilson said after reviewing the Phoenix specifications. This technology could finally give us the edge we need, but can you deliver it while under such intense pressure? Watch us, Lawrence replied with quiet confidence. As these business maneuvers proceeded, Diana continued providing intelligence about Montgomery's next moves. When Richard planned to approach Jackson Tech's largest remaining client with false information about service disruptions, Lawrence was able to preemptively address the client's concerns. The most damaging revelation came when Diana discovered documents proving that Montgomery Industries had been falsifying environmental compliance data for years at their manufacturing facilities. The violations were significant enough to trigger massive fines and possible criminal charges if exposed. "What are you going to do with this?" Tiffany asked as they reviewed the evidence. Lawrence considered carefully. "We're not going to blackmail them, but we are going to make sure the right regulatory agencies receive anonymous tips with enough information to start asking the right questions." Working around the clock, Lawrence's development team made remarkable progress on Phoenix. The new platform incorporated advanced machine learning algorithms that could predict supply chain disruptions with unprecedented accuracy, potentially saving clients millions in avoided disruptions. Benjamin, initially the most skeptical about their chances, found himself becoming a believer as their counter-strategy gained momentum. "We might actually pull this off," he admitted one late night as they reviewed improving financial projections. Elaine's health gradually improved as well. When Lawrence told her about their progress during hospital visits, her eyes regained their spark. "I always knew you were a fighter," she told him proudly. The turning point came when a major industry publication ran a feature story on the battle for supply chain's future, portraying Lawrence as an innovative David against Montgomery's stagnant Goliath. The article, researched thoroughly and written without Montgomery's influence, presented an accurate picture of the conflict and Jackson Tech's technological advantages. As Lawrence stood in the Jackson Tech office reading the article on his tablet, surrounded by his tired but determined team, he allowed himself the first genuine smile in weeks. "They tried to bury us," he said, looking around at the people who had stood by him through the darkest days. "They didn't know we were seeds." The Montgomery Empire had begun to show its first cracks. Now it was time to apply pressure until those cracks became fissures. What did Lawrence discover that could turn the tide in this high-stakes corporate battle? How will Richard Montgomery respond when he realizes he's losing control? The next chapter reveals how quickly fortunes can change when justice finally finds its moment. Secret meetings in unmarked conference rooms, encrypted communications, late-night strategy sessions fueled by determination and desperation. The battle between Jackson Tech and Montgomery Industries had evolved from a simple business conflict into a high-stakes chess match with careers, reputations, and principles hanging in the balance. Lawrence Jackson had never intended to become a corporate warrior. His passion had always been technology and its potential to solve complex problems. But Richard Montgomery's vindictive campaign had forced him to develop new skills and strategies simply to survive. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Lawrence slipped into a private dining room at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in New York City. Waiting for him were the CEOs of Westfield Technology, Axis Solutions, and Global Logistics Systems, three of Montgomery Industries' biggest competitors. Each had received a personalized invitation containing just enough technical information about Phoenix to pique their interest. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming," Lawrence began, standing before the room with the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. "What I'm about to show you will change the future of supply chain management." For the next hour, Lawrence demonstrated Phoenix's capabilities, showing how its predictive algorithms could identify potential supply chain disruptions weeks before traditional systems, allowing for preemptive adjustments that could save billions across global industries. Michael Takahashi, CEO of Global Logistics Systems, leaned forward. "This is impressive, Jackson, but Montgomery has been trying to crush you. How do we know you'll still be around to support this technology?" "A fair question," Lawrence acknowledged. "That's why I'm not here seeking investment or acquisition. I'm proposing a different model entirely." Lawrence outlined his strategic partnership concept. Jackson Tech would remain independent, but would offer exclusive implementations of Phoenix to each company for different market segments, preventing direct competition between partners while creating a united front against Montgomery Industries. "Together, we represent over 60% of the non-Montgomery market share in this industry," Lawrence explained. "With Phoenix, each of your companies could finally overcome the Montgomery advantage that has dominated for decades." Carter Williams from Westfield Technology frowned thoughtfully. "Montgomery will fight this with everything they have." "They already are," Lawrence replied. "But they're fighting yesterday's war. They're so focused on destroying my current technology that they've missed the revolution we've been building." After intense negotiation, all three companies agreed to the partnership framework, with several conditions: accelerated delivery timelines, exclusivity guarantees, and performance benchmarks that would require Jackson Tech to deliver on Phoenix's ambitious promises. When Lawrence returned to Boston that evening, he found Tiffany waiting in his office with news of her own success. "Two major European investors are interested," she reported excitedly. "They're outside Montgomery's sphere of influence, and they love the Phoenix specifications. They're talking about $20 million in immediate funding with another $30 million contingent on meeting development milestones." For the first time in weeks, Lawrence allowed himself to feel genuine optimism. The counter-strategy was working. By approaching competitors individually and offering exclusive benefits, he had created allies with a vested interest in Jackson Tech's survival. The European investment would provide crucial runway without requiring approval from venture capital firms afraid of Montgomery's retaliation. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Charles Montgomery had arranged a clandestine meeting with Lawrence at his private home outside Boston. "Richard has always underestimated people he considers beneath him," Charles explained, pouring 2 glasses of scotch in his wood-paneled study. "It was his treatment of me, his own brother-in-law, that opened my eyes to his true character." Charles revealed that despite being pushed out of Montgomery Industries, he had maintained relationships with several board members and significant shareholders who had grown concerned about Richard's leadership. "The company's innovation has stagnated under Richard," Charles continued. "He's been coasting on technologies developed years ago and acquiring companies rather than creating new value. Some of the more forward-thinking board members have been quietly questioning his strategy, but he's always maintained enough control to silence dissent." "How does this help us?" Lawrence asked. Charles smiled thinly. "Because Richard's vendetta against you has become increasingly visible and increasingly questionable from a business perspective. The resources he's directing toward destroying Jackson Tech could be better used improving Montgomery's own products." Charles offered not only financial support but strategic intelligence about Montgomery Industries' internal politics and vulnerabilities. Most valuable was his introduction to Eleanor Blackwell, Montgomery's longest-serving board member and the trustee of the original Montgomery Family Trust. "Eleanor has been concerned about Richard's leadership for years," Charles explained. "She stays on the board out of duty to my father's legacy. If you could show her that Phoenix represents the future Richard is missing, she might become a powerful ally." While these high-level chess moves proceeded, Lawrence remained deeply involved in Phoenix's development. He spent nights working alongside his engineering team, refining algorithms and ensuring the platform would exceed the ambitious promises he had made to partners. During a rare, quiet moment at the office late one evening, Benjamin found Lawrence staring out the window at the city lights. "You should go home and sleep," Benjamin advised. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Lawrence nodded absently. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. 2 months ago, We were about to become part of Montgomery Industries. Now we're fighting for our survival while simultaneously developing the most advanced technology in our company's history. It's remarkable what people can accomplish when properly motivated, Benjamin observed. The team has never been more focused or creative. Fear is a powerful motivator, Lawrence replied. It's not fear driving them, Benjamin corrected. It's loyalty to you. The conversation was interrupted by Tiffany bursting into the office. You need to see this, she said urgently, handing Lawrence her tablet. An internal Montgomery Industries memo had been leaked to technology blogs detailing their strategy to clone Jackson Tech's existing platform and then use their market position to rapidly displace Jackson Tech from client relationships. This confirms what we suspected, Lawrence said, scanning the document. But why would this leak now? Diana, Tiffany suggested. She's taking increasingly bold steps to expose Montgomery's tactics. The leak worked in Jackson Tech's favor, generating industry discussion about Montgomery's reliance on acquiring or copying innovations rather than developing their own. Several technology influencers published analyses questioning whether Montgomery Industries had lost its innovative edge under Richard's leadership. The real game changer came during Lawrence's hospital visit to his mother. Elaine had improved enough to sit up in bed and engage in longer conversations. As Lawrence updated her on the business situation, she asked a simple but profound question. What would your father have done? She asked quietly. Lawrence's father had been a civil rights attorney who had fought tirelessly for justice until his untimely death. The question struck Lawrence deeply, making him realize he had been playing defense, trying to survive Montgomery's attacks rather than proactively standing for what was right. He would have fought for principle, not just survival, Lawrence answered after a thoughtful pause. Elaine smiled. That's right. And he would have found a way to make the fight about more than just himself. This conversation sparked a crucial insight for Lawrence. Until now, he had framed the conflict as Jackson Tech versus Montgomery Industries, David versus Goliath. But the real issue was bigger. Innovation versus stagnation. Ethical business versus exploitation. Diversity of thought versus entrenched privilege. Returning to the office energized, Lawrence called his executive team together. We've been thinking too small, he announced. This isn't just about saving our company. It's about changing an industry that has allowed companies like Montgomery to succeed through intimidation and unethical practices rather than true innovation. This reframing led to a bold new dimension of their strategy: transparency. Instead of fighting Montgomery's smear campaign in the shadows, Jackson Tech would openly share their vision for the industry's future, including early demonstrations of Phoenix's capabilities at industry conferences and direct communications with potential clients about how their partnership model differed from Montgomery's extractive approach. Won't this tip our hand to Montgomery? Benjamin worried. They're so convinced of their own superiority that they won't believe we can execute even if they see our plans, Lawrence replied. And every public demonstration makes it harder for them to continue their whisper campaign about our technology being flawed. The strategy proved effective. Industry analysts began writing about the Jackson Tech model of collaborative partnership versus the Montgomery model of aggressive acquisition. Clients who had been wavering in their commitment to Jackson Tech were reassured by the public demonstrations and the impressive roster of strategic partners. Meanwhile, Diana continued providing critical intelligence from within Montgomery Industries. Her most valuable contribution came when she discovered Richard's plan to force Jackson Tech into bankruptcy and then acquire their intellectual property at auction, a strategy he had used successfully against other competitors in the past. He's pressuring banks to call in loans and investors to demand immediate returns, Diana explained during a secure call. He believes you won't be able to meet these simultaneous demands and will be forced to file for Chapter 11 protection. Armed with this knowledge, Lawrence worked with Charles Montgomery to secure alternative financing that wouldn't be vulnerable to Richard's influence. They also began transferring Jackson Tech's most valuable intellectual property into protected legal structures that couldn't be seized in bankruptcy proceedings, a contingency plan they hoped never to use. The culmination of this phase came when James Wilson, CEO of Wilson Technologies, publicly announced their strategic partnership with Jackson Tech at a major industry conference. On stage together, Lawrence and Wilson demonstrated how Phoenix had already helped Wilson Technologies identify and avoid a potential supply chain disruption that would have cost millions. "This isn't just incremental improvement," Wilson told the audience of industry leaders and journalists. "This is transformation, and it's available exclusively to Wilson Technologies clients in the automotive sector." The other partnership announcements followed in quick succession, creating a wave of positive press and industry buzz. Jackson Tech's stock price, which had fallen to devastating lows, began to recover as the market reassessed the company's prospects. Richard Montgomery, watching these developments with increasing alarm, made his first significant mistake. In a CNBC interview intended to reassert Montgomery Industries' market dominance, he dismissed Phoenix as smoke and mirrors and suggested that Lawrence Jackson was out of his depth, comments that appeared petty and defensive compared to the tangible demonstrations Jackson Tech had been providing. The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons, with business commentators noting that Richard had attacked Lawrence personally rather than addressing the technology. This fed into the narrative that Montgomery was focused on destroying a competitor rather than innovating for their clients. As Lawrence watched the interview from Jackson Tech's conference room, surrounded by his core team, he recognized the moment for what it was, the first clear sign that they were winning. "He's getting desperate," Tiffany observed. "And desperate people make mistakes," Benjamin added. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "We need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Richard won't go down without a fight." He couldn't have known how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how the final confrontation would unfold. But for the first time since walking away from the Montgomery deal, Lawrence felt the momentum shifting decisively in their favor. The David that Montgomery had tried to crush was not only surviving, it was becoming a formidable force in its own right, and the industry was watching with rapt attention. Industry headlines told the story. Jackson Tech's Phoenix platform exceeds performance promises. Wilson Technologies reports 32% efficiency improvement with new supply chain system. Is Montgomery Industries losing its innovation edge? The narrative was shifting rapidly, with each passing week bringing new evidence that Lawrence Jackson's strategic pivot was working. In Jackson Tech's Boston headquarters, the atmosphere had transformed from grim determination to cautious optimism. Engineers who had been working around the clock to develop Phoenix were now seeing their innovations celebrated across the industry. The haunted, stressed expressions that had dominated the office for months were giving way to tired but satisfied smiles. Lawrence maintained his grueling schedule, dividing time between technical oversight, partner management, and hospital visits to his mother, whose condition continued to improve gradually. Elaine had been moved to a rehabilitation facility where she was regaining strength day by day. "The doctors say I might be able to go home next week," she told Lawrence during an afternoon visit. "They're amazed at my recovery rate." "That's because they don't know how stubborn you are," Lawrence replied with a smile, squeezing her hand. Elaine studied her son's face. "You look better too. Less weight on your shoulders." "Things are turning around," he acknowledged. "Our partnerships are working. Phoenix is exceeding expectations, and Montgomery is starting to face questions from his own board about his vendetta against us." "I never doubted you," Elaine said softly. "Not for a minute." Outside the peaceful rehabilitation center, the business battlefield continued to evolve. Montgomery Industries' aggressive tactics against Jackson Tech had become increasingly visible to industry observers, and the optics were not favorable for the larger company. When Montgomery attempted to pressure a major logistics conference into rescinding Lawrence's speaking invitation, the organizers not only refused but publicly criticized the attempt to silence a competitor. The Phoenix platform's success with early partners generated tangible results that couldn't be dismissed as hype. Global logistics systems reported preventing a major supply chain disruption that would have cost their largest client an estimated $42 million. Exactly the kind of real-world validation that Jackson Tech needed to attract new clients, despite Montgomery's ongoing interference. Diana Watson continued her covert assistance. though with increasing caution as Richard Montgomery had launched internal investigations seeking the source of recent leaks. Her most valuable intelligence came in the form of board meeting minutes showing growing concern among Montgomery Industries directors about Richard's focus on destroying Jackson Tech rather than addressing their own product development lag. 3 board members explicitly questioned the resources being directed toward your company's downfall, Diana reported during a secure call. Eleanor Blackwell was particularly pointed, asking whether Montgomery Industries was now in the business of competitive harassment rather than technology innovation. This internal dissent created an opportunity that Charles Montgomery was quick to exploit, quietly rallying support among board members and major shareholders who had become concerned about Richard's leadership. The company's stock price had remained stagnant while competitors partnered with Jackson Tech were seeing significant gains. Lawrence's public profile was rising as well. An influential business magazine included him in their 40 Under 40 list, highlighting his resilience in the face of Montgomery's attacks and his innovative partnership model. The article quoted anonymous industry sources praising Lawrence's integrity and walking away from the $900 million deal on principle. "We're getting requests for interviews from major business publications and TV shows," Alicia Sanders, Jackson Tech's head of marketing, reported during a strategy meeting. "They're framing this as a David versus Goliath story, and frankly, people love seeing David win." Benjamin, always the pragmatist, cautioned against premature celebration. "Our financial position has stabilized, but we're not out of the woods yet. Montgomery still has tremendous resources and influence." "Agreed," Lawrence replied, "which is why we need to press our advantage now, while momentum is on our side." The next phase of their strategy involved demonstrating Phoenix's capabilities to a wider audience through a series of webinars and limited free trials. Each successful implementation generated case studies that directly contradicted Montgomery's claims about Jackson Tech's technology being unreliable or limited in scope. As positive press accumulated, former clients who had abandoned Jackson Tech under Montgomery's pressure began making discreet inquiries about returning. Industry analysts published reports recommending Jackson Tech as a strong investment opportunity, noting that their stock was still undervalued relative to their technological advantages and growth potential. The most significant validation came when Lawrence received the Industry Innovation Award at the annual Supply Chain Leadership Conference, an honor that had gone to Montgomery Industries for 3 of the past 5 years. Richard Montgomery had reportedly lobbied against Lawrence's selection, making the award all the sweeter. In his acceptance speech, Lawrence took the high road, focusing on the technology rather than the conflict. "Innovation thrives in environments where diverse perspectives are valued and where collaboration trumps domination," he said, receiving a standing ovation from the audience of industry leaders. Diana's most explosive revelation came via a secure file transfer containing documented evidence of Montgomery Industries' environmental violations. The materials showed a systematic pattern of falsifying compliance data at 3 manufacturing facilities, potentially exposing the company to hundreds of millions in fines and significant legal liability. After careful consideration and consultation with legal counsel, Lawrence decided on a course of action that aligned with his principles. Rather than using the information for leverage or leaking it to the press, he arranged for the evidence to be anonymously submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency through proper whistleblower channels. "This isn't about revenge," he explained to his concerned executive team. "It's about accountability. If they've been poisoning communities to save money, that needs to stop regardless of our business conflict." The EPA launched an investigation within days, sending inspectors to the facilities identified in the whistleblower documents. When news of the investigation became public, Montgomery Industries' stock dropped 12% in a single trading session, and major environmental groups announced their intention to investigate potential impacts on surrounding communities. Richard Montgomery, increasingly isolated and under pressure from all sides, made his most desperate move yet. Using fabricated evidence provided by a former Jackson Tech employee who had been terminated for ethical violations, Montgomery attempted to plant a story in the technology press, claiming that Phoenix contained stolen code from Montgomery Industries systems. The allegation might have gained traction months earlier, but the landscape had shifted. Technology journalists who received the evidence were skeptical of the timing and Montgomery's motives. Several contacted Jackson Tech for comment, giving Lawrence the opportunity to comprehensively refute the claims. Jackson Tech's legal team also filed for a comprehensive code review by an independent third party, which quickly confirmed that Phoenix had been built from the ground up with no relationship to Montgomery's technology. The failed smear attempt backfired spectacularly. Technology blogs that had initially reported the allegations as developing news published follow-up stories highlighting Montgomery's apparent desperation. One influential site ran the headline, "Montgomery's false claims show how far behind they really are." Diana, whose position within Montgomery Industries had become increasingly precarious as Richard's paranoia grew, made the difficult decision to go public with her knowledge of the company's unethical practices. In a carefully documented exposé published by a major business journal, she detailed the systematic discrimination, environmental violations, and Montgomery's personal vendetta against Lawrence Jackson. "The incident with Lawrence Jackson's mother wasn't an unfortunate misunderstanding," she wrote. "It was a deliberate attempt to create leverage in negotiations by humiliating a guest." When Mr. Jackson refused to tolerate this treatment, Richard Montgomery became obsessed with destroying not just Jackson Tech but Lawrence Jackson personally. The article sent shockwaves through the business community. Montgomery Industries' PR team scrambled to contain the damage, issuing denials that rang hollow against Diana's detailed documentation. Photographs emerged showing Elaine Jackson being directed to service areas at the fateful reception, corroborating her account and further damaging Montgomery's credibility. Social media erupted with support for Lawrence and condemnation of the Montgomery family. Dignity over dollars began trending as people shared their own experiences of workplace discrimination and praised Lawrence's principled stand. Victoria and Bradley Montgomery found themselves unwelcome at the social events they had once dominated, with several charitable organizations quietly removing them from guest lists to avoid controversy. "Public opinion has completely shifted," Tiffany reported during a strategy meeting. "Montgomery is being portrayed as the embodiment of entrenched privilege and outdated business practices, while we're seen as the future-focused innovators who stood on principle." The SEC announced an investigation into Montgomery Industries based on Diana's disclosures, focusing particularly on potential securities fraud related to undisclosed environmental liabilities and misleading statements to investors. Major institutional shareholders began privately expressing concerns to board members about the company's governance and leadership. Lawrence received a surprising call from Eleanor Blackwell, the senior Montgomery Industries board member who had been increasingly critical of Richard's leadership. "I knew your father, Mr. Jackson," she said when they met in her elegant Boston apartment. "He represented a community organization in a discrimination case against one of our subsidiaries 30 years ago. He was principled, articulate, and ultimately successful. I see those same qualities in you." Eleanor revealed that an emergency board meeting had been called to discuss Richard's future with the company. "There's significant support for removing him as CEO," she confided. "His vendetta against you has cost the company dearly, both financially and reputationally." As these developments unfolded, Jackson Tech continued its remarkable recovery. The company's stock had not only rebounded, but surpassed its pre-crisis levels as the market recognized the value of Phoenix and the strength of their partnership model. New clients were signing on weekly, attracted by proven results and the company's evident resilience. In a particularly satisfying twist, several former clients who had abandoned Jackson Tech under pressure from Montgomery returned with apologies and new contracts. The most significant was Paradigm Software, whose CEO personally visited Lawrence to restore their relationship. "We made a mistake letting Montgomery intimidate us," he acknowledged. "Your technology was always superior, and now the whole industry knows it." Elaine Jackson, fully recovered and back home, watched her son's vindication with quiet pride. "Your father would be so proud of you," she told Lawrence during a Sunday dinner at her house. "Not just for the success, but for how you achieved it, with integrity and purpose." The culmination of this remarkable turnaround came when Lawrence received a message from Richard Montgomery himself, requesting a private meeting. After consulting with his team and legal counsel, Lawrence agreed to the meeting on neutral ground, a conference room at the Four Seasons Hotel. As Lawrence prepared for this confrontation, he reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From the brink of destruction to industry leadership, from isolation to respected innovation, all because he had refused to allow his mother's dignity to be sacrificed for financial gain. The tide had turned decisively. But what did Richard Montgomery want? Reconciliation? Revenge? Or something else entirely? The final confrontation would reveal whether the Montgomery empire would adapt or crumble in the face of long overdue change. What's your guess about Richard's intentions? Comment number 1 if you think he'll try to salvage something from the situation, or number 2 if you believe he's planning one final attack. Like this video if you're inspired by Lawrence's incredible comeback, and subscribe to see the dramatic conclusion to this real-life business battle. 6 months after the fateful Montgomery reception, Lawrence Jackson stood in the elevator of Montgomery Industries headquarters, straightening his tie as he ascended to the executive floor. The journey that had brought him back to this building had been extraordinary by any measure, from near destruction to triumph, from vulnerability to strength. Beside him stood Tiffany Chen and Benjamin Williams, his most trusted executives and the people who had stood by him through the darkest days. They exchanged glances as the elevator climbed, each thinking of how improbable this moment would have seemed during those weeks when Jackson Tech's very survival had been in question. "Ready?" Tiffany asked as the elevator slowed. Lawrence nodded, his expression calm but determined. More than ready. The doors opened to reveal the reception area of Montgomery Industries' executive suite, the same space where Lawrence had once arrived as a potential acquisition, full of optimism about the $900 million deal that would secure his company's future. Now, he returned under dramatically different circumstances. Richard Montgomery's assistant, Diana's replacement, greeted them nervously. "They're waiting for you in the main boardroom, Mr. Jackson." The boardroom doors opened to reveal a scene that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Richard Montgomery seated not at the head of the table but to the side, his face drawn and his customary confidence absent. Eleanor Blackwell occupied the chairperson's position, with other board members arranged around the massive table of polished walnut. "Mr. Jackson, thank you for coming," Eleanor said, rising to greet him. "Please, take a seat." Lawrence, Tiffany, and Benjamin took their places at the table, facing the Montgomery Industries leadership across the expanse of gleaming wood. Richard Montgomery looked diminished somehow, still wearing an impeccable suit, still affecting an air of importance. But the underlying reality had changed. His eyes, which had once dismissed Lawrence with casual disdain, now held a mixture of resentment and something new: fear. "Let's get to the point," Richard said, attempting to control the meeting despite his clearly diminished status. "The situation between our companies has become untenable. The board has authorized me to offer $2 billion to acquire Jackson Tech, more than twice our original offer. This would represent an excellent return for your shareholders and resolve our differences." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Lawrence. 6 months ago, $900 million had seemed a fortune. Now, $2 billion was being offered with an air of desperation rather than generosity. Lawrence allowed the silence to stretch for several seconds before responding. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Montgomery, but I'm afraid the situation has evolved beyond a simple acquisition discussion." "What exactly does that mean?" Richard demanded, his composure slipping. "It means," Lawrence said calmly, "that over the past 3 months, a consortium of investors led by Charles Montgomery has been quietly acquiring Montgomery Industries stock through various proxy entities." Richard's face drained of color. "That's impossible. Charles doesn't have that kind of capital." "He didn't," Lawrence agreed, "but he found partners who did, including several who were disturbed by your company's business practices and leadership approach." Eleanor Blackwell intervened. "Mr. Jackson, Are you saying that you now control a significant portion of Montgomery Industries? The consortium controls 48% of outstanding shares, Lawrence confirmed. Combined with the 14% controlled by board members who have pledged their support for new leadership, we effectively have a controlling interest. The boardroom erupted in shocked exclamations and hurried whispers. Richard Montgomery half rose from his chair, his face contorted with rage. This is outrageous! A hostile takeover orchestrated by my own brother-in-law? Not a takeover, Lawrence corrected him. A course correction. Montgomery Industries was once known for innovation and integrity. Under your leadership, it became known for bullying tactics, discrimination, and environmental violations. Lawrence opened a folder and distributed documents to each board member. These are the findings from the independent investigation commissioned by concerned shareholders. They detail a pattern of behavior that has exposed the company to significant legal, financial, and reputational risk. The board members began reviewing the documents with expressions ranging from shock to grim confirmation of long-held suspicions. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion, environmental violations, financial irregularities, and the personal vendetta against Lawrence Jackson that had consumed company resources for months. I've built this company into a global powerhouse, Richard protested, looking desperately around the table for supporters. Everything I've done has been for Montgomery Industries. No, Richard, Eleanor Blackwell said firmly. You've been acting in your own interest, not the company's. The board has called this emergency meeting not just to hear Mr. Jackson's presentation, but to vote on your continued leadership. Richard's face flushed with anger. This is all because I supposedly insulted his mother? This elaborate revenge for a minor social faux pas? Lawrence's expression hardened. What happened to my mother wasn't a faux pas. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate her based on her race and background. Diana Watson confirmed that you and Victoria planned it as a negotiating tactic. Diana was a disgruntled employee seeking attention, Richard dismissed. Diana was a conscientious professional who could no longer tolerate the unethical practices she witnessed, Lawrence countered. And she wasn't the only one documenting your behavior. Lawrence nodded to Tiffany, who distributed additional materials showing the systematic campaign against Jackson Tech, the coordinated client poaching, the pressure on investors, the attempted technology theft, and the fabricated allegations. This wasn't business competition, Lawrence continued. This was a personal vendetta that damaged Montgomery Industries' focus, reputation, and financial performance. The board members exchanged troubled glances as they reviewed the evidence. Richard Montgomery, seeing his support evaporating, made a last desperate attempt to maintain control. This is all a manipulation, he insisted. Jackson has orchestrated this whole situation to destroy me because I saw through his overvalued technology. Are you really going to let him take over a company that's been in my family for generations? Eleanor Blackwell removed her reading glasses and fixed Richard with a stern gaze. Montgomery Industries was founded on innovation and integrity. Your grandfather understood that sustainable success comes from creating value, not destroying competitors. The board's responsibility is to the company and its shareholders, not to your ego or family pride. She turned to address the full board. We have before us a motion to remove Richard Montgomery as Chief Executive Officer of Montgomery Industries, effective immediately. Those in favor? One by one, hands rose around the table, some confidently, others with evident reluctance but clear resolve. Richard watched in disbelief as the vote proceeded, the majority clearly in favor of his removal. This is a mistake you'll all regret, Richard said bitterly as the vote concluded. Without me, this company will collapse within a year. Actually, Lawrence interjected, we have a transition plan already prepared. The consortium doesn't want to dismantle Montgomery Industries or absorb it into Jackson Tech. We want to restore it to what it once was, an innovative leader that succeeds through excellence, not intimidation. Eleanor nodded approval. And who would lead this transition? Not me, Lawrence said, surprising many in the room. I'm committed to Jackson Tech and our partnership model. Instead, I'd like to nominate someone with intimate knowledge of Montgomery Industries operations, proven integrity, and the vision to lead the company into a new era. The boardroom doors opened, and Diana Watson entered. The former executive assistant had transformed her appearance, dressed not in the understated attire of support staff, but in the confident business attire of an executive. She walked to the table with composure that commanded attention. Ms. Watson has an MBA from Wharton that she completed at night while working here, Lawrence explained. She has intimate knowledge of every aspect of Montgomery's operations and has demonstrated extraordinary integrity under difficult circumstances. Most importantly, she represents the meritocratic future this company needs, where talent and character determine advancement, not background or connections. Richard Montgomery gave a scornful laugh. My assistant? You want to replace me with my assistant? Your former assistant, Diana corrected him calmly, who watched for 8 years as you squandered opportunities, mistreated employees, and compromised the company's values. I stayed because I believed in what Montgomery Industries could be, not what it had become under your leadership. Eleanor Blackwell studied Diana thoughtfully. It's an unconventional choice, but these are unconventional circumstances. The board will need to discuss this recommendation in detail. Of course, Lawrence agreed. We're prepared to present Diana's full qualifications and a comprehensive transition plan, but first, there's someone else who should be part of this discussion. At Lawrence's signal, the doors opened again to reveal Elaine Jackson, elegant in a simple but impeccable suit, her silver hair framing a face filled with quiet dignity. Lawrence walked over to escort his mother to a seat, the one Richard Montgomery had just vacated at the board table. Mom, welcome to Montgomery Industries, Lawrence said with a smile. Things have changed a bit since your last visit. Richard Montgomery, watching from the side of the room where he now stood without authority, appeared ready to object to Elaine's presence. But something in the collective gaze of the board members made him reconsider. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, the door closing firmly behind him. Mrs. Jackson, Eleanor said warmly, I want to personally apologize for your treatment at the reception. It was inexcusable and did not represent the values this company was founded upon, the values we intend to restore. Elaine nodded graciously. Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. I accept your apology, and I'm proud to see how my son has turned a painful moment into an opportunity for positive change. 1 year later, Montgomery Jackson Technologies had emerged from the merger of the two companies as the undisputed industry leader in supply chain management solutions. Diana Watson, as CEO, had implemented sweeping reforms that revitalized the company's innovation pipeline while addressing the cultural issues that had festered under Richard Montgomery's leadership. Lawrence continued to lead the technology division, focusing on expanding the Phoenix platform and developing new applications. The partnership model he had pioneered during the crisis had been expanded, creating a collaborative ecosystem that benefited the entire industry. Richard, Victoria, and Bradley Montgomery had retreated from public view, their social standing diminished by the revelations about their behavior and business practices. The Montgomery family name remained on the company, paired now with Jackson, a symbolic recognition of how the conflict had transformed both entities into something stronger together than either had been separately. On a warm spring afternoon, Lawrence and Elaine visited his father's grave in a quiet Detroit cemetery. Lawrence placed fresh flowers beside the headstone, while Elaine straightened the small American flag that marked her husband's military service. He would be so proud of you, Elaine said, linking her arm through her son's as they stood together. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you did it. Lawrence nodded, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment. You know what I realized through all this, Mom? Respect isn't just about how others treat you. It's about how you treat yourself, knowing what you stand for and refusing to compromise those principles, no matter the cost. Your father used to say something similar, Elaine recalled. He said dignity doesn't have a price tag because its value is infinite. He was right, Lawrence agreed. $900 million seemed like a fortune, But it wasn't worth sacrificing what matters most. As they walked back toward the car, Elaine glanced at her son. "What happens next?" Lawrence smiled. "We keep building, keep innovating, create opportunities for people who might otherwise be overlooked. All the things we talked about before Montgomery came into our lives. And all because you stood up when it mattered," Elaine said proudly. "I had a good teacher," Lawrence replied, squeezing her hand. From a painful moment of humiliation had come transformation, not just for Lawrence and Elaine Jackson, but for an entire company and the industry it served. The $900 million deal that never happened had ultimately created something far more valuable. A business culture where innovation thrived, merit determined success, and dignity remained priceless. What would you have done in Lawrence's position? Would you have walked away from a life-changing deal to stand up for what's right? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story of dignity over dollars inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember that your principles are worth more than any paycheck, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away from the wrong opportunity. Thank you for watching, and until next time, never forget your worth. This powerful story reminds us that true success isn't measured by dollars, but by dignity. Lawrence Jackson demonstrated that standing firm on your principles might initially seem costly, but integrity ultimately prevails. The Montgomerys' wealth couldn't shield them from the consequences of their actions, proving that even established power structures can crumble when built on discrimination and disrespect. The most valuable asset in business isn't money, but character. Lawrence's refusal to compromise his values not only preserved his self-respect, but inspired loyalty from his team, attracted ethical partners, and ultimately created more sustainable success. His mother's quiet dignity throughout her humiliation reflected the strength that had shaped Lawrence's character from childhood. Sometimes, walking away from what seems like an opportunity reveals a better path forward. By rejecting the acquisition, Lawrence was forced to innovate and create a superior business model. This story teaches us that discrimination often masks fear of others' potential, and that true leadership means standing up for those who sacrificed for you, even when it comes at great personal cost. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' treatment of you, but by your unwavering commitment to what's right.